It's time for the Daily Planet podcast show. So sit back, relax, and give us a go. Scott and Matt and maybe a guest, undertaking an epic pod quest. We're gonna ramble on about movies and books and television and directors and film festivals and this really long list of stuff that I know nothing about, but they gave it to me and they really wanted me to read through it. And that's all I can really say about it, but it's gonna be great. Okay, start the show.
Hello, and welcome to the Daily Planet podcast, your weekly podcast for all things movies, TV, books, and anything else we feel like talking about. My name is Scott Daly, editor-in-chief of DailyPlanetFilms.com, and I'm joined as always by my co-host and co-editor, Matt Freeman. Matt, how are you today?
I'm doing great, Scott. I'm very excited to talk about this exciting little book, Fates and Furies, to finish our discussion, which we started a couple weeks ago. How about you?
A couple weeks ago, like a month ago,
well,
it feels like.
Yeah, well, I don't know when we started reading it, but...
What is this book about? I don't even remember. Maybe our guest can tell us.
Can our guest tell us what this book is about?
Who is our guest? Who's out there?
Who's that?
Do I introduce myself?
Cyndee is back to help us wrap up this book. Welcome back, Cyndee.
Thanks.
So this was a while ago, huh? The
Yeah.
Oscars kind of got in the way, and it's
This
been
book
3
is
weeks.
2 weeks overdue.
Well, you know, yeah. I mean, just like we said in the podcast last time, I left the recording and basically read the book in 2 days. So I've been done with this book for about 3 weeks.
Yeah,
I actually read the whole book again.
Oh,
What?
really?
Yeah. Because I was
Well,
like, I want to reread the beginning, knowing what I know at the end. And then I was like, we still can't do the podcast, so I'm just going to go ahead and read the end again.
Well,
so that I don't forget the book.
You can just go ahead and lead the discussion then.
Yeah, I think that sounds great. All right, but before we get into that, we got some news. Matt, I just wanted to circle back around based on our Oscars discussion last week because they happened. So,
yeah, I remember.
And I was basically completely correct in everything and got nothing wrong, right?
I mean, and as far as I can recall.
No, unfortunately, I got about 5 or 6 things wrong. And one of them being that Sylvester Stallone didn't win Best Supporting Actor. And I'm really not happy about it.
Maybe he's just not that good.
That was, I don't know.
What? Excuse me, Cyndee? What? You're uninvited.
Cyndee has been dropped from the call. No, I was kind of, I didn't get that choice. I don't know. I wasn't impressed. I just was so unimpressed by Bridge of Spies that I didn't understand that choice.
Yeah, and I mean, when I think about it, I really think it's just the Academy kind of considering themselves elite, and like Sylvester Stallone, while he was great in this movie and Rocky was great, he's also been in a lot of bad movies, and I just think they thought maybe it would hurt the brand of the Academy to have him accepting an award for acting. Yeah,
no, I think that's true. I definitely think that like a big part of the Academy Awards is projecting sort of a facade of artistic credibility, because if they did just start giving, Best Picture to Mad Max and Best Actor to Sylvester, then it would be obvious that they were following like popular tastes, and then it's like, well, if you're following popular tastes, then my opinions are just as valid as yours. But if they pick weird choices that don't make any sense, then they can pretend that they did it for good reason.
Yeah.
That's my explanation.
Doesn't mean I'm not going to be unhappy about it.
Yeah.
But, I mean, the good news is The Revenant didn't win big. Mad Max won big. Mad Max won 6 of its 10 awards, I think, which is pretty great. Basically all the technical categories. So it was technically the best film of the year, but somehow...
Except visual effects.
Yeah. Ex Machina won visual effects. That was really cool. I was happy about that. That movie had a $15 million budget, and the VFX were integral to making that movie work. So that was really cool.
I was really surprised because I never heard of Ex Machina, and also you said Mad Max was going to win.
Well, Ex Machina. I hear a lot of people say they never saw it, and I can kind of understand that because it was weirdly marketed and everything. But that's like probably one of the better movies of the year. I think that's probably one of the movies from this year that's going to go on, and people are going to be talking about it for 10 years to come. Whereas I don't know if people are going to be talking about The Revenant in 10 years to come.
Yeah, I definitely agree. But The Revenant did win for Best Director, even though I don't understand. Like, there was something that James Gunn actually tweeted out after this. And it was more about the fact that Best Director and Best Picture this year didn't match up. But it was basically like, how do you award that award to different movies? Because, like, the finished product is what determines if the Best Director was the Best Director. So if it's the best movie, that means the director did the best job. And to move on that point further, if you're saying that Mad Max won all the technical awards for having best sound and best editing and all that stuff, well, the director is the one that managed all those people and told them to do what they're doing. So it's kind of weird, but
yeah, I don't know. I mean, I guess you can draw weird fake scenarios where you have a movie that turned out really badly, but the director did a really great job within the framework of the terrible movie. I don't know. Like, what if all the actors were terrible, but the movie is really well directed? I don't know.
Yeah.
I agree that it doesn't quite make sense. But I did go out and see Spotlight after it won.
The Best Picture winner of the year.
Mm-hmm.
Not The Revenant, thank God.
Not The Revenant, not Mad Max, but Spotlight.
What did you think of Spotlight?
I mean, I liked it. I it was one of those movies that kind of absorbed my attention. I wasn't bored, and I was I don't know. I'm gonna nitpick it because when you win Best Picture, you expose yourself to nitpicking.
Yeah, that's fair.
But I liked Michael Keaton. I don't know if I liked Mark Ruffalo's like weird twitchy character. Like, I didn't buy that. I didn't buy his character. It looked fake to me. Like, it looked like a character. It didn't look like a person.
Yeah, I can see that.
And I mean, overall, it was really good. It flowed really well, and maybe about 10 minutes too long in terms of how it felt. But it was informative too.
I just think it's really cool that that was probably the last time period, or the most recent time period, that you'd be able to make an investigative journalism film about, because journalism has completely changed. The Spotlight group still exists, I think, but like, this movie was very physical, and like, in that, like, it had journalists like jotting down notes on pad and paper, and like it was early 2000s, so it was like right at the cusp of the internet taking over everything. I think one of the coolest scenes is when they have that AOL billboard right next to the newspaper, the Boston Globe headquarters or whatever. So it's kind of like showing like all this stuff is looming over the paper, and this is really the last of journalism as they knew it at the time. But yeah, I mean, I liked it a lot. It was a great movie. I was happy it won. Cyndee,
can't wait till it comes on HBO.
I do wonder if they didn't give it the award partly just as like a signal boost to basically say to people, hey, go see this. This is important. You need to know this information.
I wouldn't be surprised. Yeah.
Yeah.
But cool. The other big thing was Leo got his Oscar.
Mm-hmm.
Which I guess was not a surprise. I think everyone picked that.
I was really looking forward to seeing his face when he lost, so.
That's terrible.
I mean, I'm happy he won, but I can't imagine how he would have reacted if he would have lost.
Well, at this point, if it were you, wouldn't you just have a sense of humor about it by this point? Like, I can imagine if it were me, I would just laugh if I didn't win after that, you know?
No, I think he would, like, cry.
No, I don't.
He wanted it so bad.
The thing about Leonardo, like, it's not like his career is going to get any better for winning it. and it's not like it was going to get any worse for not winning it. He's like one of the biggest stars in the world, and he has been for a long time.
It's symbolic.
Yeah, the most you could say now is that he will probably do some crazier stuff. Like he'll be less concerned about doing a picture that fits the mold of what an Oscar-winning picture is, and just do whatever the heck he wants, which is kind of exciting. Mm-hmm. But here's the thing: like, is his desire for an Oscar something that the internet manufactured, or is that just something that he stated as really, really wanting? Because, like, I mean, everyone wants to win an Oscar, and he's been nominated a few times, but, like, were we all just blowing this thing out of proportion? Because I'm kind of thinking yes.
I guess we'll see.
I'm sure he wanted to win, but, like, I don't know.
Based on how he acts now, I think we'll see. If he goes on and makes more of the same type of movie, then I think that's just who he is. But if he goes off and makes indie movies, then we'll know that he was being competitive.
Yeah. I really liked his speech, too.
I did, too. And they didn't interrupt him. They let him talk for a pretty long time.
I know. What'd you guys think of the little ticker at the bottom where they could pre-write down who they were going to thank?
I thought it was ridiculous and pointless. Like, you can't even read it.
Yeah, it still ran over. I mean, the whole point was to make it so they didn't feel like they had to thank everyone on stage and take a long time, but I think the speeches were still just as long, so yeah. I don't know. Whatever. That was the Oscars. It's silly. It's fun.
Lady Gaga should have won.
Yeah. Sam Smith. I did not like that song. And then his speech was awful. I am the first gay person to win an Oscar.
Well, he said he didn't know. He heard that.
What the person meant was that an acting Oscar. There's been no.
Yeah.
But that was ridiculous. And I thought Chris Rock did a really good job as well. I thought he was funny.
He did.
Yeah. He didn't. It wasn't horribly embarrassing at any point, which most of the hosts are horribly embarrassing at one point or another.
The only thing that I think was pretty bad was the little Asian kids for the PwC joke.
It just sort of flopped.
Yeah, well, it turns out like the parents of the kids didn't even know what kind of joke it was, and said like if they had known before they signed the contract, they never would have let their kids participate in that joke. And I also think it was kind of funny that like that's the accounting firm I used to work for, and I found it surprising that they would sign off on having their brand name used on a "let's make fun of Asian people being good at math" joke.
Yeah.
So
I just didn't get it. It's like I don't think, is it a stereotype that Asian children are working at accounting firms? Like I've never heard that actually.
Yeah, I don't know. It just didn't land, and it was mildly offensive.
Yeah.
But anyway, that's the Oscars. Until next year, I'm sure we'll be having the same conversation next year. But I wanted to move on to something that's new for today, because the trailer for the Ghostbusters reboot dropped today, and there's been a lot of very mixed opinions online. Have you guys seen this?
Yeah.
No, I didn't know about it till just now.
What'd you think about it, Matt?
Looks fun. I mean, it's difficult to tell what the tone of the movie will be, but they're definitely kind of doing like a similar but distinct tone compared with the old Ghostbusters movies, which is good because when you've got different comedians, you want to honor the voice of those comedians. You don't want to try to copy what the guys in the first movie were doing.
Yeah, I agree. I grew up loving the Ghostbuster movie. I still like it a lot. I'm not quite as obsessed with it as some of these people on film Twitter are, that are furious that this movie exists, furious that it's an all-female cast, just acting like ridiculous human beings. I mean, I think it looks good. Some of the jokes in the trailer didn't land, but Paul Feig's trailers have never been that great. I mentioned in my review of Spy how terrible the trailer for that movie was. So I I think a lot of times he saves a lot of the best jokes for the actual movie because his movies are always a lot of improv, so there's always like multiple takes of the same scene with different jokes in it. So they save the funny ones for the actual cut of the movie. But it's enough to get me on board. Like, I thought the gadgets looked cool. I thought the ghosts looked really cool. It's kind of like an updated version of the effect that was done in the original movie.
Yeah. I mean, they're definitely going for kind of a corny, like intentionally corny appearance for the ghosts, but
Yeah.
it looks better than it did still. So
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, even if it's just mediocre, it's 4 comedians that I really like. Seems like they're having fun, so that'll be good enough for me.
yeah, I agree.
And Cyndee, you have no opinion.
No.
Did you like the original Ghostbusters?
Yeah, but I did have to watch it a million times, so.
Look, I was a child, okay? I couldn't help it. All right, the last thing I wanted to talk about was a movie that's actually opening tomorrow. Disney's new animated movie, Zootopia. The reason I wanted to bring this up is because it's currently 100% on Rotten Tomatoes, which I wanted to bring up just because I think it says 2 things. One, that I think Disney animation has been really, once again, killing it lately. The quality of films they've been making. And I think 2, kind of demonstrates the inherent limitations of Rotten Tomatoes format in general. Because most of the reviews of this I've read have been pretty mixed. They liked it, but they didn't love it. But they liked it enough to say, oh, that's not a rotten. Because, I don't know if, Cyndee, do you know how Rotten Tomatoes works?
It's the percentage of the reviewers who liked it or not.
Yeah, so it's the critics basically submit and they say rotten or fresh. So it's like yes or no, basically. So all the critics I read gave it a pretty mixed reviews, but like, yeah, they're not going to say, oh, I didn't like it. So, but on the other side of that coin, I think I've read a little, and I don't want to get into too much what the plot of this movie is, but apparently it's dealing with some pretty complicated themes of like race relations and minorities versus majorities and like some complicated stuff for a kids movie. So
don't say that. I want to bring my 5-year-old.
Well, I mean, you can bring your 5-year-old. She's just probably not going to get it. But I mean, she's going to like the funny jokes, but she's the political stuff's probably going to go over her head.
I mean, I think stuff like that affects kids in a more subconscious way. But I mean, yeah, that's good. I mean, I think what I'm learning as a parent watching all these Disney movies is that most of them are actually saying things. They're usually just very subtle. Like, I don't want to derail, but like I was even reading about this, how like the character of Gaston is like this great, basically, indictment of like our culture, because Gaston is this really horrible person, but everyone in the town loves him, and I mean you could sort of go on from there, but that's kind of the crux of it, is like,
yeah,
no one notices how horrible Gaston is because he's like strong and handsome, and that's how the world works, basically.
Yeah.
So.
I'm interested. I wasn't planning on seeing this movie. The first teaser I saw, it actually looked kind of dumb, but now I'm very, very interested in checking it out. So, from what I understand, that it's much less like hidden and subtextual political meanings, and much more in your face about the comparisons they're making. I think like when you the cool thing about making a movie using animals is you can draw pretty direct comparisons. I think there's a scene when someone calls one of the bunny characters like cute or something, and she literally says back like, we can call ourselves that, but you can't call us that. So I mean, it's gonna be pretty overt race relation stuff.
Wow, that's it. I wonder how that's gonna play.
Well, yeah, I mean, like, it's playing with critics, right? But with actual audiences, I mean, there's the Trump voter out there that's probably not gonna like it. we'll see. I don't know. I want to check it out, and I'll probably talk about it next week. But I think it's cool that Disney's, willing to take more chances and go out there, and they've been really making some quality movies. I think Big Hero 6 was Disney, right? And
Yes.
And Wreck-It Ralph, and then Frozen, of course.
Yeah.
So they're really giving Pixar a run for their money, even though they're basically just competing with themselves.
Yeah, well, this is a good era, and if that's the case, this is a good era of film, of animated film.
For sure. All right, so that's all the news items I had, unless either of you had anything you wanted to bring up that's exciting. Matt, we didn't make fun of Batman versus Superman or Ridley Scott today.
No,
there was just no
news. Yeah, I just keep hearing dumb tidbits about Batman versus Superman, but nothing remarkable.
Apparently, people have actually seen the movie now. Some critics, I think there's an embargo, so they can't say what they think, but they've seen it.
Okay.
And it's trending based on ticket sales to have a $120 million opening weekend, which loses to Deadpool.
Yeah.
So two of the biggest superheroes in the world fighting each other, loses to Deadpool.
Yeah,
we'll see.
That's this would be a textbook case of how to mess things up when you have the best possible hand dealt to you.
Yeah. So we got it in. We made fun of Batman vs Superman.
Congrats.
Yeah.
Yes. I'm very happy. Because we're just Marvel shills, right? Because that's the thing on Twitter is if you make fun of Batman vs Superman, you're part of a greater conspiracy theory to tank the DC expanded universe. There's actually
Marvel White Knights.
There's actually a whole Reddit thread on that, how people believe there's a DC, like a entire conspiracy, I guess orchestrated by Disney to tank these movies. I don't know. And they've recruited all these critics, and part of their evidence was they found like a Twitter bot retweeting the same funny joke about Batman vs Superman like 1,000 times. And that's their evidence for a great conspiracy.
Scott, you're not supposed to talk about the conspiracy on the podcast.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, they told us.
Yeah, you better start sharing that money with me that they're paying you.
We'll edit this out. It's fine. They won't.
Yeah, okay.
They'll never know.
All right.
So let's move on to the book then, because we're here to talk about the second half of Fates and Furies and the book as a whole. So I think we all kind of had mixed reactions going into the finishing up the first half. I think we were all interested to see where things went, but weren't sure how we felt about the book. So before we get into some of the details, Cyndee, what is your, I guess, overall opinion of the book now that we finished it?
I really liked it. I thought the writing was excellent. I thought it was really interesting and original. And I read it twice, so going through the second time, there were still things that I didn't like, but that happens when you read a book 2 times in a row. You notice every little thing. But overall, I just thought it was a really great book, and it deserved the awards it's gotten.
Cool. Matt, do you have overall thoughts?
Yeah, I'm gonna have to uncreatively reuse the word great. It was something like after I read it, it kind of kept going through my mind, and I kind of kept turning things over in my head and analyzing them. So it was definitely something that affected me. I would say. I would say that even now it's been a couple of weeks since I finished it, and I'll still sort of see something of the book in real life, and so it's almost like it's influenced me to that degree, to the degree that it's actually influenced my thinking in a permanent way, maybe, just in terms of little like perspectives and stuff like that, and ways of seeing things or phrasing things. But yeah, I'm glad that I read it, and I think I would recommend it to anyone of a literary bent, but it's also pretty entertaining.
The recommendation.
Oh,
to be
sorry.
The last thing
Well, I retract my recommendation.
I'm just kidding.
Anyway, okay. What do you think, Scott? What was your overall sense of this book?
Yeah, I really liked it. I was one of those people that did not like it at all coming in. I wasn't even sure how I felt about it going into the second half, but I found the second half so much more readable, and I don't know. I don't think we talked about in our first podcast if she was going to really change up the prose style when it switched to a different perspective, and she really didn't. I mean, it was still the same kind of writing, in my opinion. I don't know if you guys agree with that or not.
I think she did, I mean, she didn't spend as much time describing things, in my opinion. Like, I felt like the pacing was faster, and there were some of those lyrical moments, but they were not as frequent, in my opinion, in the second part.
Yeah, it was subtle. I don't think the prose style changed so much as Laro and Mathilde see the world very differently, and so the writing was different in the sense that it's focusing on different things it's focusing on different things.
The one part that really stuck with me, and it was actually in the first section, but it stuck with me even more after we learn all the truth behind who Mathilde is and her role in their marriage, was, I don't know if you even remember it, I think it was around a Christmas time when they were still living in that basement apartment, and some guy like walked by and like saw what appeared to be from the outside as like a happy situation where everyone's just having a good time and happy together, and like the book takes the time to say that man went home, and like anytime he was feeling down remembered that moment. And I think that's kind of like a big important window into what the book is saying as a whole, that like there's a lot of stuff going on under the surface of everything, that whether it's the art that Lotto was creating or the marriage, that there's so much going on underneath it all that it can look normal or happy or what have you from the surface, but you just can't tell.
Yeah, and I think that ties into another theme that I noticed, if we're talking about that now.
Yeah, go for it.
Which was that, and the book says this almost straight out, literally, that Lotto and Mathilde mutually have lots of misapprehensions about each other. I'm not sure if that's the right word. They have misunderstandings about each other. Like, Lotto doesn't know all these secrets about Mathilde, and actually, in sort of a more subtle way, she thinks all of these things about him, but when we look into his head, he isn't seeing things the way she is assuming he's seeing them. That's more subtle. It's kind of harder to point out, but like at the time that comes to mind is when she's basically trying to rub in how bad he feels about abandoning her to go to the artist retreat by leaving the newspaper about that has the clipping about the opera composer dying. She's like leaving that out for him to see just so she can like rub it in. And then she sees him see it, and it's like, from, correct me if I'm wrong or if your impression of this is different, but she sees him see it, and in her mind he realizes that she's trying to needle him and he feels bad. But from his point of view, he just feels bad because the guy died. He's not catching any of this like ultra high wavelength mind games that she's trying to do. So that's just an example.
I interpret it that way, I think.
Okay.
The part that I liked the most was when we see him return from his perspective, he smells the trash being left out and jumps to the conclusion that it's just because she was so distraught without him that she that like he was the one that emptied the trash, so it just wasn't done because he wasn't there. When in actuality, she just was out of the country and
for
like
2 weeks or something. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's like the thing that like in his mind like calms him and makes him realize that, oh, she did actually miss me, and like things are gonna be okay, when it like neither of them were on the same page at all with that.
Yeah.
I thought that was really fascinating.
Absolutely, and that's, so just to cap off my thought, what the book says almost straight out is it doesn't matter. The fact that they have complete misunderstanding of each other in so many sort of surface level ways. They both like know each other and it almost implies that they knew each other as soon as they met, and like nothing that happens to them can actually change their sort of deep just getting of each other, which is sort of deeper than the level of what information they're sharing with each other. That seemed to be a very pervasive theme, because there's so many instances where they're not getting each other in terms of what they're actually trying to communicate to each other, but they're still sort of exactly what the other person needs.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I thought that was definitely prevalent through everything. Cyndee, you haven't said anything in a while. What do you think?
Okay, so going back to what Matt was talking about before, when she's coming down the stairs and he's finding the newspaper clipping, I have to disagree with your interpretation. This is one of the passages that I marked as like particularly memorable. I just like the way it was written. And I don't know, I feel like he is seeing something ominous in this.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if it's necessarily like her rebuking him for going to the artist retreat, but it's like her expressing her victory over this other guy who she felt was going to take her husband on a like intellectual affair, not necessarily physical, but that he had this talent and her husband was in love with him in a way because of his talent. And she was jealous of that.
Sure.
So it just, when it described her coming down the stairs, like it says that she was unsmiling, intent, blade-like in her red dress, and they were looking at each other in the mirror, and then she starts smiling and acting for the guests that are coming, and then he flinched back as if he'd put his hand down on a hot stove, and she fixed him in the mirror as she slowly descended. So I definitely think he's feeling something coming off of her here. I don't think that he's just reacting to the guy dying. I think it's a combination of both.
Okay.
And
yeah, that's fair. And I didn't go back and like compare the two scenes from the two different perspectives. But would you agree, regardless, that there's a lot of sort of complete miscommunication between them in other places in the book?
I completely agree, and I completely agree with your interpretation of what she's trying to say with that.
Mm-hmm.
And I listened to a couple interviews with her when she talked about that, and she talked about how, especially he doesn't know her as far as like specifics and facts about her life, but he knows her on an elemental level.
Mm-hmm.
And there's just something about being in that day-to-day intimacy with another person that affords you this physical knowledge of each other that goes beyond understanding like the minutia of what's going on in their head at any given moment.
Yeah.
So
I think that's Sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, like, I think that's true. Like, I think I may not know, take any of my like really close friends. I may not know what's going on in their head, but I can probably predict what they're going to do regardless. Like you have sort of an external model of them, which may be really accurate, even though you don't understand what's going on under the surface. So I think that's an interesting thing for a book to be about, honestly.
Yeah, I think it's really cool. Like, one of the things I had said in the first podcast was that I thought these two people were really in love with each other, but I wasn't sure. And by the end of the book, like, I was definitely 100% sure. They make it very clear that they actually were very much in love with each other. And it's I enjoyed seeing that. I mean, I think I want to get into Matilda's character specifically, because I think, to me, she was fascinating, and I think more interesting almost than Lotto. Just her background and how she sees herself, and how that plays out and what she decides to do and what not to do. So, Cyndee, why don't you talk about her, what you thought of her character?
Well, I thought she was a. I thought her whole story like sounded like it came out of like a 19th century Gothic novel, which I thought was really interesting because she's like using all these art forms. Thought Lotto's section was like him thinking himself as a tragic hero and drama, and her section reminded me so much of like the Gothic novel, like the being in a closet, sleeping in a closet, and being in the house with all the doors that were locked, and it's creepy and not having any connection with other people. It's pretty clear to me that being abandoned as a child, reverberated throughout her psyche, and she never really developed any kind of attachment to an adult at that point because everyone in her family is a psychopath and not warm at all. So all the people who are her guardians didn't care for her either. So she had never known love. And the fact that that is the case means that it's profoundly surprising that she was able to develop this loving relationship with Lotto, because usually if you don't learn how to form loving attachments as a child, you never do. It's something that's broken in your brain. Like you need a lot of therapy to get past it. So the fact that she was able to develop a pretty healthy, loving relationship is pretty amazing to me. But she always bore that scar. And there's actually a quote in here that I thought was really good that described how much that affected her life. It talks about, it occurred to her that life was conical in shape, the past broadening beyond the sharp point of the lived moment. The more life you had, the more the base expanded, so that the wounds and treasons that were nearly imperceptible when they happened stretched like tiny dots on a balloon slowly blown up. A speck on the slender child grows into a gross deformity in the adult, inescapable, ragged at the edges. So I love that analogy of the balloon and how just the damage she suffered as a child just got bigger and bigger as she got older. And she could never get past that. So she still thought she was evil. And when you read her section, you realize that she's not evil. She's not bad. A lot of the good act that she thinks she's just putting on is really her. But she can't see herself the way she really is because of how she was treated as a child.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I think that she thinks that there's this dark person that she's hiding from the world underneath her the whole time, and it's really not there at all. She's just like that person that she's putting on in front of people. I really think is just her. I mean, she is more manipulative than she lets on. I mean, she's kind of pulling the strings behind everything that goes on in her life. Like we learn that Lotto didn't meet her by chance. She heard about him and set herself up to meet him, because basically she was just kind of resigned in her life to jump from person to person that she could use to survive. And I think that the interesting thing about her relationship with Lotto is I think it very much started as that. I don't think she loved him at the beginning of it, but I think it developed into something over time. And I thought that was really cool.
I thought she came to him not just wanting to use him, but like once they were together within those first couple of weeks, I think that she had already developed real feelings for him.
Yeah, because he's described, I mean, it's sort of a perfect match in the sense that he's described as just being this fountain of like genuine warmth and genuine love for everyone and no judgment. Like they kind of say over and over that like he's incapable of judging people, like almost to a fault. And so I think that's like exactly what she needed to sort of wash away, it's like water to a dying plant, just kind of wash away all of her sort of poisonous self-image and just allow herself to be loved.
Mm-hmm. Well, she's also like fiercely possessive of him.
Yeah.
Like she basically anyone that she could have any real attachment to him outside the surface level friendship, she does kind of drive away. His mother, the dude, the opera dude.
Well, she didn't do anything. I mean, that just happened. But she was definitely jealous of him.
Yeah, I mean, but she did kind of manipulate him, and like with how she reacted to his phone calls, like she knew how to push him,
Yeah.
to make him feel guilty.
Didn't work though.
I don't know, maybe it did.
No, I don't know. I think if he had actually liked that aria, it would have been a very different
Well,
ending.
maybe he didn't like the aria because he felt guilty.
Yeah.
So one question I've read all about that there was going to be like a huge twist in this book.
Yeah. What was that?
What? I mean, there were some revelations. I mean, like
Yeah.
we kind of called why Charlie did what he did to him. Although, like Cyndee said in the last podcast, that's the longest con like I've ever heard of. Like just waiting for the perfect moment to screw her over.
Yeah, and also I'm a little bit confused. Was he planning some sort of elaborate vengeance from the time his sister died? And if, like, he genuinely seems to love Lotto, so I can't buy that he's getting revenge on Lotto. But then it sort of suggests that he is harboring some malice, because when his sister dies, he like sits down and like begins planning, basically, very ominously.
Yeah, well,
so
I thought
don't
the
know.
revenge was specific on Mathilde, because Mathilde took Lotto away from him.
Well, that's what it said initially, but then after that whole part, and what I find interesting about this part is I don't know if we can trust the narrator at that point. When it goes into Gwenny's perspective, it's very confusing because it talks about how Mathilde is writing this whole thing out.
Right.
And Mathilde is
happened.
conjuring the image of Gwenny. So
Right.
this is Mathilde's interpretation of what happened. We don't know if it actually happened.
Well, I mean, we know it's not accurate because we got the scene, we got a couple of those scenes from Lotto's perspective, and the details were different.
Well,
Yeah.
they seemed similar enough, but
They were similar.
I don't
They were
know.
similar enough. I definitely remember at least some details being different, but yeah, I agree that we don't actually get a window into Charlie's head in terms of why he's doing what he's doing. We have to take him at his word, basically.
Yeah. So was the twist then the reveal of Lotto's son? Like, was that like? Cause that, I don't think that counts as a twist when it's just they plop a character in and then. Oh, by the way.
Maybe the twist was that she slept with him and then it turned out to be Lotto's son.
Yeah.
Which at that point I was just like, oh, am I supposed to be disturbed by this? This book is so full of weird stuff that I'm not disturbed by this.
Yeah.
So.
Well, it's not from her perspective. It's not disturbing, but it's kind of heavily implied that he knew, like that was his father. Like, so
I didn't think that was implied at all.
I thought it did. I mean, I don't know. Like, that whole part was weird to me, and I'm not sure. Like,
I think
to me, some of the themes are very clear in what this book's trying to say about relationships, about marriage, about art, but that whole part to me, I didn't really understand.
Yeah, I agree that a lot of the sort of micro level stuff in the book was not clear, and you know, I think often more intentionally not clear than unintentionally, but sometimes I think the author was just trying to be too artistic and lost a bit of the like, okay, but I appreciate the artistic nature of this, but I need to actually understand why this person did this in order to care.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's get. I'm looking at some of these questions. Cyndee, Antoinette, did your opinion of her change as we learned more through Mathilde's perspective, from where we left off to the end of the book?
I think I started feeling a little more sorry for her. Because I realized how deliberately Mathilde cut her off from her son. I was a little surprised about this whole weekly phone call thing because I don't think that was mentioned in the first section at all. And then the second section, you find out they're not completely estranged; they still talk every week.
Yeah.
But he hasn't gone to see her, and it's due to Matilda's manipulations. That he was completely separated from seeing his mother before she died. I mean, she's obviously not a good person. I don't know if that part with Gwenny actually happened or not because that unreliable narrator. I think if it did happen, then maybe it did make Lotto better off. Like, what would his life would have been if he would have been with this girl who had a baby?
Yeah.
But it still feels like completely morally wrong what she did. So I still judge her for it. But I definitely think that she is mentally ill and just kind of a sad figure.
Yeah. So why do you think the author chose to write that section in a way that would make you kind of doubt the story? Have it be Matilda writing it or creating it in her mind rather than just showing us the event? I mean, it seems like all it does is get us to doubt what's going on, and if we're supposed to trust it or not supposed to trust it, how does that fit into what's trying to be said?
I don't know.
You know, it's funny. I didn't even think about it until you asked the question, and now that you asked the question, I think it's brilliant. Because this is really a story about Matilda and her processing the things that have happened to her in her life. And sometimes in real life, you don't actually know exactly what happened. You find out some piece of information that changes your perspective on lots of things that you thought you knew, and then you have to process that even under uncertainty, and so you have to tell yourself a narrative that is satisfying to you and that fits the information you know, and you're going to tell yourself some best version of the story that you can to make yourself feel better.
Yeah,
that's actually a really cool thing to have in a book, because I honestly, it's all fiction anyway in the first place. So nothing really happened, right? What's more interesting is knowing how Matilda is internalizing this information.
I think that's a really good point, especially when you compare it to her brother falling down the stairs and how which version that she wrote in her mind was the one that actually happened. Did she push him? Like, did she just watch him? And it specifically mentions that, like, she kind of wrote the story that made her seem the least bad in her mind. So I think that doubly kind of confirms exactly that, what you're saying. So that's a really good point.
Yeah, I do find that, that's a good point. But I find it interesting in this book because this book has such a strong omniscient perspective. We have these brackets that kind of tell us the truth overall of what's happening, and then we shift into different people's heads throughout the course of the book. So the fact that there's this one part that is not like that is really interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, isn't it, Scott, the part you just mentioned where she's reflecting on the story of her brother, isn't that located close to this part anyway in terms of pages, or am I totally misremembering?
Yeah, it's near the end.
It's right after.
Because I thought that was a great little thing to drop in, like wherever it was dropped in. I remember it like really kind of getting to me, because I was like, it doesn't really connect to what comes before it or what comes after it on any overt level. But it connects in the sense of, like, yes, this is like a keystone of her personality. Of, she really believes that she was just a child and that this was just a terrible accident and a terrible tragedy, but she can't dislodge this suspicion that maybe she's a monster and she did it on purpose, even though she doesn't believe it. But it doesn't matter, and it's like eating away at her, and this is what makes her think she's a monster, even though we know she's not.
Yeah, and I love how that's left kind of ambiguous. Like, which version is the real version doesn't matter
Yeah.
because both of them are simultaneously true or not true to her.
Yeah.
And that is really cool.
Interesting.
Well, it does say, like, she feels like she must have pushed him because that was the only thing that could have deserved the consequence that she got.
Yeah, but
But
even
nobody
that
saw.
could just be writing it. Yeah, I mean, like no one saw her do it, so that's her on one level just trying to rationalize what happened to her next.
Yeah, to basically justify why her parents would have done that to her because
Yeah.
her parents would have to be monsters otherwise, and they probably, I don't know, I've never been in that situation. It's hard to imagine, like, if one of your children accidentally killed the other one. It would be very hard to sort of get your head around that.
Yeah, but I don't know if, and I don't have kids, so I don't know if I could just fully disown my child like that.
Right.
I think it'd be very difficult, but Jesus.
Yeah.
Like you said, they're a very weird family anyway.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's bring it back to Lotto then, because I think my opinion of him, the more I learned about Mathilde, like the more my opinion of him changed, and like there were times in this book that I really didn't like him, but by the end of it, to me, like I just like I felt it, like he seemed like just this child to me. Like even as an adult, like he never fully took care of himself. Everything that he got throughout his entire life was gifted to him by others, and it was done so like surreptitiously that he just assumed it was all his doing. Like the fact that like we were kind of right in that the first play he wrote, she made heavy edits to it to get it. Now he had some basic level of skill, but she made edits to it. The reason he got into the school that he got into was because his mom donated a ton of money. The reason the play even got produced is because she blackmailed this guy that she lived with.
Right.
Like every moment of success almost that he experienced in his life was aided by the help of someone else. I think that's cool, but it completely like disarms the character of any malice to me because I look at him just like this little baby that I don't know. Like I just felt like he was just coasting through life on the backs of other people, not even aware of it.
My perspective of him changed. I really did not like him in the first section, especially towards the end of the first section, because of several different scenes that she presented. Him giving the talk about men and women in San Francisco, that was very sexist. And when he, what am I thinking of? There was this other, when he took her story and shared it as his own. And I don't know, like, I find arrogance and narcissism really unattractive, and I really did not like him at the end of that section. And when I saw him through her eyes, I liked him better. And I think there's an issue in this book of she sees him as better than he really is, and he sees her as better than she really is. They both see themselves as better because I don't know, she just sees him as so good and amazing, but he's really, I mean, he is kind of selfish and he is clueless. And yes, he makes her coffee every morning and that's nice, but she does almost everything for him.
Yeah, I mean, like that's the one thing he does for her.
Yeah, and she brings it up over and over again, like, oh, he makes her milky coffee every morning. And that's how he shows he cares about her. So when I read her section, I start to see why she loves him, and I don't hate him quite as much. I read his section again, and I'm like, yeah, he's not that great. But I mean, I definitely agree he's kind of an innocent child, and that's how they present him. That he's just doesn't understand. He's so privileged, and he just doesn't get it. But he's still really narcissistic. And
yeah,
that's
I mean,
interesting.
you almost can't even blame him for his narcissism in a world where everyone's just given him everything he needs. Like his perspective of the world is that it revolves around him almost. So like,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
how do you blame him for that?
And it's also interesting that like he comes off as more arrogant in his own chapters than he comes off as when we're seeing him from the outside.
Yeah,
It's
that's
almost
true.
it's almost like his internal voice is really self-aggrandizing, which kind of makes sense because everyone is their own like um uh you know sneaky vizier whispering compliments in their ear, like just kind of um putting the best light on yourself all the time. And so
Yeah,
um Matilda's chapters are sort of a dark mirror of that, where she's not telling the best story about herself, but she's telling herself a story about herself that is palatable to her. Um, she's just trying to make sense of the world. But then when we see Lotto from the outside, he's like, at least Matilda focuses more on how he's kind of loving and full of life. I don't know. It's weird. You get a lot of different opinions on Lotto, but that's because he affects different people different ways, I think, and is somewhat callous about how he affects them. On top of that,
yeah, yeah. I mean, I think it's like, to me, this book, and I'm getting into generalities again when we're talking specifics, but to me, the book is almost as much about the creation of art as it is about marriage, and that like I think Lotto to me represents this view of art, and we even talked about this in our first conversation, how it just like the ridiculousness of saying that someone could just sit down at a typewriter for 5 hours and punch out a play that's amazing. I mean, that's just not the way things work, and we see that through Matilda's point of view, that's absolutely accurate. That's not the way it worked at all. That there's actually a lot of struggle and fighting that goes on to create this thing, and time and effort. And I think that's true. I think the author's saying that's true in both marriage and in the creation of anything. And I thought that was really cool.
that's really interesting. Like there's almost a parallel where both art and marriage require some ineffable spark, but the spark isn't enough. You also need all of the work on top of it.
Yep. Cyndee, do you agree with that assessment? I'm not married. Yeah. You are, so I'm talking about marriage as if I know what it's like at all.
Oh, wait, I thought we were talking about creating art.
Well, it's both.
It's the same thing.
Marriage is art. I thought it was really cool, like that not only like, we predicted that she helped edit his plays, but like how involved she was backstage, like ordering around actors and producers, and like how she was basically like the director to a certain extent, and just like like how involved she was in the entire process, like that. And that was especially depressing when then it moved later to show how she had written some stuff later in her life, and it just was never financially successful or popular. It's like, she through him created all this amazing work that people loved, but when it was just herself, nothing.
Was that because she didn't have the talent, or was that because she didn't have the advantages that he'd had?
I absolutely think it was the advantages. Yeah. It almost feels like, in the defense of the Matilda's actually a really good person camp, like she cashed in all her favor cards on him and had nothing left for herself. Because I think what it also says about art or creating that it's almost as much skill as it is luck and or who you know. Because would he have ever become a famous playwright if she didn't have that stuff over her uncle that she could blackmail him with?
I think it's pretty silly that he would just accept that blackmail. Like, wouldn't a guy like that just kill her? But
it was a nice blackmail.
Yeah, I think it was definitely hinted at. Like, there's lots of talented people, but not everyone can get published. It's hard, and it's luck.
And I don't think talent is like this one value type thing anyway. Like I don't remember the names or any of the details, but I remember like there was some reference to the types of things she was actually creating, and they didn't seem to be the types of things that would get an audience ever conceivably. Um, Whereas a lot of those plays, at least you're supposed to believe that they had sort of a moderately broad-based appeal. It was just a matter of getting them in front of people's eyes in the first place. And once you got them in front of people's eyes, people would like them. But it seemed like Matilda's writing very like internal niche kind of like psychoanalyzing herself through art almost. And it's like, it doesn't matter how good it is in some objective sense if nobody can get anything out of it. I mean, that seemed to be like more her character anyway, is more interested in that sort of solipsistic worldview. So she's going to create very different art and maybe less appealing art, even if it's still really beautiful, on its own terms.
Yeah, I mean his worldview and the life he led is very relatable to the sort of New York aristocratic rich society that would go to plays all the time and be obsessed with Broadway and off-Broadway plays and that kind of thing. So it makes sense that his type of stuff would find an audience in that kind of environment. Whereas her background is completely different.
I don't know. Like, she had that one play that was about a character from a Shakespeare play. And to me, that sounded like it would have fit in with the things that he was doing. Not all of them. Like, he did the realistic plays too, that are mostly just rehashing of his life. But
Yeah.
he also did some weird mythological stuff too, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, well, it's funny. So I want to ask everyone, on reflection after reading the whole book, do you think that his collaboration with the opera singer was intentionally ridiculous, or that we just think it was ridiculous because, or maybe we don't all think it was ridiculous? I think it was ridiculous, and I think there's a good chance the author intended it to be sort of over the top and like Lauder's getting really carried away here. He has no idea what he's doing. He has no idea how to write an opera. The opera artist is likewise out of his depth and doesn't really understand. And this is going to be a disaster. And it kind of is a disaster because it's sort of stillborn. It never turns into never bears fruit as a project. I don't know. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I thought it was absurd. I mean, part of me would want to see it. Like, it was so delightfully weird that part of me would want to see what that would actually look like being performed. But yeah, I mean, it was insane. Like, I'm not even sure. Like, I'm not even sure what it had to do with like, they started with Antigone, and then it really had nothing to do with her at all by the end. It was silly.
I don't know. Like, I listened to the interview with the author, and I'm not sure if she was being facetious. She was like, "Yeah, I really would like to make this opera." Like,
oh God.
So,
yeah.
So I don't know.
Yeah, I
mean, I'd go see it. So.
Yeah, I'd like to see this interview if we can put that in the.
Yeah, will you send us a link so we can put it in the show notes?
Yeah, I gotta find it. I listened to several different ones, and now I can't remember which was which.
Okay,
but
so
I'll see if we can find it.
We've kind of touched on this, but let's talk about marriage. And I'm gonna let you two married people take this away, because I have nothing to contribute. What do you think the book overall says about marriage? I mean, do you think they have had a good marriage, bad marriage? How does it compare to your marriages? And please don't get in trouble with your spouses by answering this question.
Don't worry, I'll never listen to this. Okay, I'll go first. So one of the things the author said several times in her interviews that I have found really interesting is that this book was her attempt to come to terms with her conflicting feelings on marriage, because she is actually against marriage. She did not want to get married because she doesn't like the history of the institution, because it is sexist and about, ownership and all of that. And so she didn't want to get married. And then she fell in love with this guy and he asked her to marry him. And she realized that if she didn't say yes, she was going to lose him. So she would either have to become a hypocrite and do what she said she wasn't going to, or she would have to lose this great man that she was in love with. So she got married anyway. And she still has a lot of conflicting feelings about the institution of marriage, and especially as it relates to feminism. And yet she's got a really happy marriage and she's benefited immensely from that partnership. So these kind of complications weave their way through the novel. I think we discussed earlier the paradox of knowing someone and not knowing them. And there's several different quotes about that throughout the book. Also, there was this quote that I really liked that she shared that kind of shares her feminist views on marriage. This is Matilda's section. She says, "That was when she knew with existential bitterness that her husband had understood nothing of her. Somehow, despite her politics and smarts, she had become a wife, and wives, as we all know, are invisible, the midnight elves of marriage." And I love that quote. I thought it was dead on. Because even in modern society, wives are the ones who manage life, especially when children are involved, for the most part. And most of that work is completely invisible. They don't even notice it's happening. Like, life's just running along smoothly and there's no recognition of how much work it is. So I thought that observation was very accurate. On the other hand, I think she is trying to depict a happy marriage, and it was a very deliberate choice not to have any infidelity, because that's kind of overdone. And in serious literature, like, we have to have drama and we have to have conflict. So infidelity is like one way to make there some kind of a conflict. So she didn't want to do that. And I just felt, I don't know, marriage is complicated and there's good and bad. And there was obviously times when they weren't getting along very well, and there was some unfairness as far as the way he treated her and the way he kind of took her for granted and didn't recognize how much she contributed to his success. But they did make each other happy, and they did bring this constancy and stability into each other's lives. And there was another quote at the end of the book that I thought was really beautiful.
Look at Cyndee being all prepared.
Yeah. Because usually I'm just like, and I sound stupid. So I'm going to write some of this stuff down. So this is the scene at the end where it describes their wedding. And it says, "It was mathematical marriage, not as one might expect additional. It was exponential. In they'd come integers, out they'd come squared." And I thought that was really beautiful.
Yeah. I just totally forgot. I was going to ask you something and I forgot. So Matt, while I'm thinking.
Yeah, I like everything that Cyndee said. Let me see what the actual question was. What is the novel saying about marriage? How does my experiences line up, more or less? Yeah, I'm going to speak in extremely broad generalities instead of answering the question. But like, yeah, and this is probably all going to be very like heteronormative or whatever. But I think, like, from a evolutionary point of view, humans have like a marriage-shaped hole in our minds, And I think that our modern society asks too much of the institution of marriage, and as Cyndee said, the institution of marriage has all of this baggage that has been accrued over 10,000 years or whatever of human history, and especially recent history. So on the one hand, we have the modern institution of marriage, which has all this baggage and all these implicit expectations. But on the other hand, we have this marriage-shaped hole of I need a mate who will commit to me and who I will commit to, and we will see to each other's needs as best as we can according to our own strengths, and we will invest all of our resources in raising children together, although that's not what happens in this book. So I do think that what does happen in the book is that they do devote what resources they have to each other. And it's much more obvious in the case that Mathilde devotes all of her, like 100% of her resources to Lotto. Lotto is just an idiot and kind of a buffoon. And so like he is actually devoting everything that he has to Mathilde. He just doesn't have much to devote. And I think that's sort of common in the real world in terms of how the division of labor goes between the sexes. It's like very often the men are actually trying their darndest. They just don't know what the hell they're doing. And maybe that's the insipid apology that doesn't actually work. But anyway, that's kind of my thoughts. And I do think the book is saying some very interesting things about marriage. I don't know if it's saying what I just said there, but I think what I just said there sort of maps onto what the book is saying in some way.
Yeah, I find it interesting, Lotto's kind of biggest fear or insecurity in their marriage is that she's going to leave him. And then we learn from Mathilde's side that would actually never happen, because the thing that she really wants more than anything in the marriage is just to have someone that stays and loves her. And that stems from all her insecurities as a kid. So I thought that was cool that like there's so much that goes on that neither of them know about. Like you guys were saying before, they both understand each other and then completely don't understand each other at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think every relationship, there's things that you know about each other, and then there's things that you don't. No matter how long you've been together, I think so. I don't know. I don't have a lot to contribute to this one.
Well, you could extrapolate, but I understand if you don't want to.
Your people don't listen to this podcast. My person listens. Hi, my person.
That's how you know you're not married yet.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yes. My wife would listen if I asked her to, but she's got much more important things to do.
So do you think if Mathilde told Lotto everything, like all her deepest, darkest secrets, do you think that would change their relationship fundamentally? Cyndee?
I think the one thing that he would really struggle with, which is the thing that he did struggle with, and as I reread this section, he was not clear on whether she slept with Ariel before or after they were married, but regardless, it bothered him that she was prostituting herself to this man, because his idea of her was like purity, and the fact that, and he liked it so much, this idea that she was a virgin, which was kind of gross, but he was just so disturbed by the fact that she slept with this other man and probably did it for money, because why else would you sleep with that guy? And he couldn't get over it. And I think that's the one thing that he would have had a real problem with. The whole thing about her childhood, that's just sad. I don't think he would have judged her for that. I think that's just her believing that she was bad and not actually anything she did. The whole sterilizing herself thing, I don't know.
Yeah, I think the sterilizing herself thing would be among, I think that would be worse than the thing with Ariel, because if she actually told him all of the details of what happened with Ariel, I think he would get over it. But the fact that she's hidden it from him and continues to hide it from him, I think exacerbates the effect that it's having on his mind at the end of his section, right before he dies. But I think the sterilization thing, like, we know, and we talked about this on the last podcast, how important having kids was to him. It was like something that he would talk about to the extent that it was annoying.
Yeah.
And she not only just, like, she's so passive aggressive. I mean, I think she's generally passive aggressive, but like in this case, she's just like, I'm not going to have this conversation. I'm just going to go sterilize myself and not tell him. And then we never have to have the conversation. And it's like, wow, that's, you're taking a lot away from that guy without giving him any indication that you've done this. Like, taking what he wants from him, basically. So, taking the future that he imagined with, the marriage that he imagined, even. So, I think that's probably the rougher of the lies.
Yeah, I don't know if he really wanted kids, or he liked the idea of having kids, but just expected her to do all the work. Like,
well, yeah, I think that's definitely true.
And I don't know. I don't know.
So
I don't know if he was really that upset about not having kids. You could tell he wanted them, but not enough to actually do anything about it. Like,
yeah, it's true. Like, we never saw any indication that they'd had like a big argument about it. It was always just more like him sort of whining.
Yeah, and he'd say, "Oh, it'll happen," and she's like 45 at this point. It's like, no, it's not gonna happen.
So, do you think that they're saying then that to a certain extent, ignorance is bliss? Because these, like, I think you guys are right that if he knew this stuff, I think it would fundamentally change their relationship and how it worked, for the worse for the most part. So, are secrets okay to a certain extent?
I guess. I mean, there's a certain, I don't know. There's a certain, like, I'm not sure how to phrase it. Like, we all don't have a secret where, like, we accidentally killed our sibling, or we think maybe we killed our sibling on purpose or whatever. But we all have some, like, weird quirk of how we see things, or like our motivations aren't always entirely pure. And I don't know if it's necessary. Like, it's sort of the difference between, like, run-of-the-mill honesty and what's that word? Like the extreme honesty or hyper honesty or whatever it is, where like you commit to just like telling everyone everything you're thinking all the time, and it doesn't really work, because you like civil life among humans who have to live together, especially, is sort of built upon politeness. And what is politeness if not lies? Small lies that cover, like, oh no, that's okay, don't worry about it, I'm not offended, oh, it's no trouble. Like, yeah, these are all lies technically, and we actually need them to function, I think.
There's a difference between small lies about, like, what you're thinking, which is going to happen to anybody, and everybody has inappropriate thoughts that they realize are not okay to share. But something like getting sterilized, yeah, you should really talk to your partner about that. I understand why she felt the need to do what she had to do. Like, she was so terrified of losing him, and she didn't think that he would understand, because she didn't want to tell him the whole backstory of, why she didn't want to have children. But
yeah,
there's definitely a quote in here that talks about how marriage is made of lies, kind ones mostly omissions. If you give voice to the things you think every day about your spouse, you'd crush them to paste.
yeah. I mean, I think that I mean, she definitely feels that if she's ever completely honest with him, he would run away from her in terror or whatever. So, I mean, I think it's saying that I agree with both of what you're saying fundamentally, that the big lie that I would have a problem with in his shoes is the sterilization one. That's something that if I ever figured out about it, I would not be happy. But yeah, I don't need to know what's going through someone's mind day to day.
Yeah, so I guess by bringing up the contrast between like lies of politeness versus lies of I got sterilized secretly, I guess I was begging the question of like, well, is that line really so obvious? And I think we all agree that the sterilization thing is crossing the line. But maybe slightly less seriously, like is just neglecting to tell him that she was a kept woman. Is that the worst thing ever? Because like that's like, why is that any of his business in one sense? It's sort of not his business. Like she had this time in her life before she met him, and she ended it when she met him. So yeah, that's that secret I see as being like, yeah, it would have devastated him, and it did devastate him. But also, I can't find a good ethical argument that faults her for keeping it from him, other than like, oh well, we should all be transparent with our spouses because it makes us closer to them. But it's like, well, in this case, it wouldn't have made her closer to him. It would have made him pull back, which it did.
Although if she'd been honest with him, it couldn't have been used against him.
That's true.
At any point. And I mean, hopefully he would have gotten over it. Like, I do think it's stupid that he would care so much about what she did before they got together. But it's his ideal of purity and her being special, different than all the other girls he was with. That is the problem here. But I don't know if it would have changed the outcome. Like, maybe he would have been happier before he died. He still would have gotten a brain aneurysm and died. But he just wouldn't have been tortured for those few weeks by the thought of her betraying him.
So you don't think that the reason he died was that he was under so much stress that he basically had the aneurysm and he wouldn't have had it otherwise?
I've never heard of a stress causing a brain aneurysm. I don't know. I mean, I thought it was genetic, but
I don't know either.
I'm not an expert.
I thought it was a coincidence, if anything. I was like, I don't know. My reading of it was literally that, like, this drove him to death, or this killed him. Finding out about this killed him, which makes it very dramatic, obviously. But I don't know if that was the correct reading.
Yeah,
I don't know. It does talk about like his heritage, and I did read that like if you have a parent that had a brain aneurysm, you're more likely to have one. I mean, physiologically, I don't know all the causes, but yeah, you could interpret it that way.
Yeah. Okay, so I think we're running out of time here. So, is there any parting words either of you have for this book? It always, like, we do say whether we recommend it or not at the end, but that's always kind of weird to me because if there's people listening that haven't read the book, they've just had it entirely spoiled for them.
Yeah.
But I think we would all recommend this, right?
Yeah, I definitely recommend it. I do recognize that not everyone likes this type of book, and I've read some reviews of it, and some people don't like books that are challenging to read and aren't straightforward, and books that you really have to look things up and think about, and they're not going to like this book ever. So if you're that kind of person, don't read it. But it's definitely, if you are an English major, you will like this book.
Yeah. Just to follow on that, as someone who loves reading and writing, like when I hear, oh, this is a very literary book, this is a very difficult book, I sort of like shy away because I'm like, yeah, I don't really want to work. But reading this book doesn't feel like work. The way it's written, and just like the quality of the prose, it's just like soothing water pouring over your brain. Like you're never struggling against it. You're just sort of pausing every once in a while to appreciate or to reflect on something. So yes, I definitely
Very,
recommend it, and I
very
really liked
beautifully
it.
said.
Well, thank you. It's actually, I find that like when I think about this book, I go into like the world of this book, and I start speaking in ridiculous
Yeah, I
sentences.
think I do that. Like you read a book for a while and you start thinking in the type of prose you're reading, right? I think that's the
Yeah,
weirdest thing about reading to me, and the most pleasurable too, because like you just take on the style of whoever's work you're
yeah.
reading.
Which ironically is why I stopped writing recently, because I was like, oh no, everything I'm writing sounds it's I'm trying to write like this author, but I'm not succeeding, and thus it's terrible. So I'm gonna stop for a bit until my writing actually goes back to normal.
Yeah. Yeah, so Fates and Furies. I understand why this won all the awards it did last year. I enjoyed it, pleasantly surprised. Um, really wasn't sure about this one, but I am glad I read it too. So before we finish up here, why don't we decide what our next book is going to be? We're not going to let the people
We're
out
gonna
there
decide right now.
Yeah, we're going to decide right now.
All right, this could go on for a while.
I thought I was just suggesting a book. I didn't know I had to like convince you.
Well,
of course you have to convince me. Okay, fine. We won't decide right now. We'll just everyone make your cases and we'll decide later.
Crap.
And Cyndee, you get to go first.
No, I'm not going first. You go first.
Okay, Matt, go first.
Okay. The book that I am going to be suggesting for the court is called Liminal States. It's a science fiction book. I don't want to describe it too much, because I actually know quite a bit about it, because I've wanted to read this book for several years at this point. I just have never gotten myself to the point of buying it. It may also be a little bit long. I don't know how long it is actually, but I know that it divides into 3 sections very conveniently that we could easily split up across 3 podcasts if we wanted to, or divide it some other way if we wanted to. But I know it has 3 sections. I know that because the 3 sections are in 3 drastically different styles. Um, so it's science fiction. I'll just tell you what the styles are. Like the first bit is actually a western, and then the second bit is like a noir detective story, and then the final bit I think is maybe like a modern thriller, and like the prose style and kind of the tropes change over the course of the book. And I always thought it was fun. The author who wrote it, he's written a lot of other things that I really like. So that's my submission, Liminal States.
That sounds really interesting. I kind of want to read that regardless of if we pick it or not.
Great.
Cyndee, do you want to go next, or are you not ready?
Can I read the description off Amazon?
Sure.
Okay. This is a book I suggested to you before, but probably of the ones I gave you, it's the one I'm most interested in reading. It is called The Orphan Master's Son by Adam Johnson, and it was the Pulitzer Prize-winning novel of 2012. And it is about a North Korean citizen with a rough past who's working as a government-sanctioned kidnapper when we first meet him. He is hardly a sympathetic character, but simply is not author Johnson's aim in a totalitarian nation of random violence and bewildering caprice, a poor gray place that nonetheless refers to itself as the most glorious nation on earth. An unnatural tension exists between his citizen's national identity and his private life. Through Jun-do's story, we realize that beneath the weight of oppression and lies beats a heart not much different from our own, one that thirsts for love, acceptance, and hope, and that realization is at the heart of this shockingly believable, immersive, and thrilling novel. So I've never read anything about North Korea before, and it sounded really interesting.
Yeah, that sounds interesting too.
Sounds really interesting too.
The Orphan Master's Son.
Okay. Well, the book I wanted to pick is a book I've read before, but I really wanted to reread it, and I'm going to tell you why. The book I want to read is The Gunslinger, which is book 1 of Stephen King's Dark Tower series. But it is a book. It is still kind of a standalone story on its own. The reason I want to read this is because they're actually finally making a movie of this novel. starring Idris Elba and Matthew McConaughey. It's going to come out January of next year. So I want to reread it before. I want to read the whole thing before it comes out. It's Stephen King's attempt at a fantasy Lord of the Rings-esque kind of sprawling world story, but also kind of westerny. It's pretty short, so it won't be a very long read. But it's really good, and I want everyone to read this book, and I want to reread it myself. So that is my choice.
I don't know if I should. I've heard bad things about the ending.
Okay, here's the thing, listeners. My father hates the ending of this series, and every time we're together, we'll go on a rant to me about how terrible the ending is.
And he hates Stephen King for writing it.
Yep, the ending is not terrible. The ending is perfect. It's perfect. It works so well, and he's wrong. So, if you want to find out why, you'll have to read all 7 books. But I'm only talking about the first book, which is really good. So that's what I want. So I guess what we're going to do here, guys, is we'll put these in the show notes, and then anyone listening can send us an email or a tweet or whatever, letting us know what they want. And we'll tally all those votes. If we don't get enough to come to a conclusion, the 3 of us will just get together and make a decision on our own. And I guess we'll do that in about a week or so, and get started a week or 2 after that with whatever book we pick. But
if we do the Gunslinger, I don't think we should do multiple podcasts because it's really short.
Yeah, if that's the one we pick, then we'll just do one. Yeah, that book is.
You want to know something interesting? This is based on Child Roland to the Dark Tower Came, which is based on the legend of Roland, a knight of Charlemagne, which is who the character Roland in the book we just read was based on.
That's weird. I knew the first part of what you said, but I didn't know all that.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Well, I was actually looking that up because, there was this knight theme, which the whole idea that you would have a baby and then give it up for adoption and the adoptive parents would keep the name you gave it is really just stupid and ridiculous. But she wanted to go on with this whole name theme of knights. And I was like, Roland, that sounds like a knight. But I looked it up. It's not a knight of the Round Table like Gawain and Lancelot. It's a whole different legend based on the real Emperor Charlemagne.
So it has knights, and it also has mermaids.
Yeah,
I forgot his mom was a mermaid.
His mom was a mermaid, and I realized that the name Ariel meant something before it was Little Mermaid. But Little Mermaid is actually literature. It's not just the Disney cartoon, right?
Yeah.
Is the name Ariel in that too? Anyway, there's
I don't think
multiple
so.
mermaid references in this book too.
Oh,
what does
there are.
that mean?
We could write a whole think
What
piece
does
about
that
what
mean?
I don't know.
mermaids mean.
I think either purposely or not purposely, she was basing the character of Antoinette after the Little Mermaid because of the red hair and then she kind of turns into Ursula the Sea Witch. I don't know. I think she was influenced by that, definitely, even if she didn't do it on purpose.
Well, it is interesting to me that the Antoinette character becomes this bitingly horrible old woman, but you don't see that in her at the start of the story. I didn't anyway. So yeah, she does become the Sea Witch.
Yeah.
And she lives by the sea. I mean, yeah, I'm telling you, that's intentional. She's a mermaid. She ends up living by the sea in a castle by the sea. She can't leave because her knight son won't come back to save her.
Yeah. You're right.
And she named the girl Gwenny, which, what is that supposed to mean? I don't know. I'm just going on a tangent. She's obviously not his one true love.
I think the thing we could say is that we could talk about this book for hours if we wanted to.
Yeah.
But we have to wrap it up, unfortunately. I think this was a really good talk, though, guys. I think this is a great book to do because there was so much to talk about. I hope one of our 3 choices is just as interesting and fun to talk about. But we will find out next week on the podcast. Matt, I don't know what we're doing. What are we doing? I planned ahead up until this week, and now I'm out of planned aheadness.
I have no idea.
We're gonna have to come up with something.
Yeah, we will, and it'll be the best podcast yet.
Every episode is the best podcast yet.
It's true.
All right, guys. Cyndee, thanks for joining us again. It's always fun getting together with you and talking.
Thanks.
Matt, do we want to do our internets?
Sure. I
still like Twitter.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm having a hard time with Twitter ever since they made the changes, but I'm still on Twitter at MORIDINAMAEL, which you'll see in the show notes in a way that is spelled in letters and not just a ramble of sounds. And I write articles for Daily Planet Films, sort of. Still working on one. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah. My Twitter's still mostly in chronological order. Mostly.
Yeah. I feel like stuff is being skipped now. I just feel like it is.
Yeah, I mean, if you haven't checked it in a while, sometimes it jumps around. But when you have it up all day on your second monitor at work, it's not a problem.
Well, that's...
Nobody cares that you have Twitter on your monitor at work.
I mean, if they do, they don't tell me they do. I don't know.
How do you get paid so much?
I can be found at ScottDaly85. That's DALY. The Daily Planet Film Twitter is at Daily Planet Films. And like Matt said, all of our writing can be found at www.dailyplanetfilms.com. I just released an article about Fuller House yesterday, which is the new Netflix show that is a sequel to the Full House sitcom. It's really bad. You should read why it's bad. It shouldn't be that surprising to you because Full House was bad. But we also, I think, my sister Melissa, who's doing the reading a book from every country of the world, has a new review coming out for her next country. So that should be hitting pretty soon, or Monday. So look forward to that. Other than that, I think that's all we had. So we'll see you guys next week.
Podcast is over. It's done. We hope you all had some fun. Go back to your work or your school. Maybe the gym. Hey, that's cool. Regardless, just go away. But please come back next